Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Kame House lobby with 2MK team. Today, we are once again working on scrambles in our US East Coast lobby. This is East Coast 2, ring match priority lobby 02. You're looking for me, Rillian, the red hit outside of Kame House, and the passcode for the lounge is 2717. We were looking at the issue of scrambles again, as noted. Starting with slightly different opponents this time around. I'm using it to help refine our strategies. As I've noted the last time, my scrambles with this opponent happen because they basically never stop hitting buttons. So I must come up with a strategy for this that will prevent that from resulting in me getting hit and capitalize on as much as possible. In that scramble, for example, I probably could have blocked it out, gone for something invincible, etc., because I knew my opponent was going to hit buttons. Another scramble where I, again, knew my opponent would hit buttons, so to hear the actions that I'm taking against this particular opponent works way better with Piccolo, who just deals with that aspect of it. In that case, I should probably have delayed a little bit longer on the super. I did it because I knew that my opponent did not have 3 bars yet, but overlooked the fact that by blocking it, they would get the 3 bars to make the punish. So yeah, another scramble style situation, decision made, without taking fully into account what needed to be factored. So let's try that again with more focus on that expectation.
Time to begin the match.
I expect that after a while my opponent will stop doing the same thing in general. But because they're generally twitchy and have difficulty being patient, there still are certain responses that my characters can have that will help out in these situations. Deflect is a good one, but for Kid Buu will generally just result in even more buttons, so let's not do that way. For example, I could have basically kept on doing that because the scramble that appears in that situation is still a scramble. Frieza is not the best option for facing this type of opponent, for example. Not at this spacing, anyway. He doesn't have a way to easily beat up on people for doing that, so let's bring Piccolo back in. Not every interaction in the game is basically going as you'd expect it to. Knowing when your opponent is likely to hit buttons and when will help you change that position. From there you can simply evolve into figuring out which buttons they're most likely to hit. For example, there I should obviously have expected the second use of the same move because they were already in that mindset after image-wise. And I can generally assume that as soon as they see one super, they're probably going to try for another, giving me that opportunity. So, even if you can't build up full advantage or have a lot of time to watch meter perfectly or so on, you should still do your best to have a general understanding of your opponent's mindset. You won't quote-unquote guess right every time, and managing to not be stressed out about that is quite important. But knowing where to start can avoid some of the frustration.
It's all or nothing. Fight it out.
So now we have motion, which is a more complex situation for the game. He's not as good at dealing with that sort of thing. But he's not all that terrible either. It's a question of knowing which motion to worry about and which what will do what. For example, with Gohan, it's a matter of spacing crouch heavy or similar things so that when he does certain actions, he's not dangerous. But this is much harder to do as a whole in terms of a good strategy for the situation. It's harder to time, it's harder to understand, it's harder to space. The thing about most opponents is, unless they're managing to lose fairly heavily, and in this sort of situation, where they have someone more or less telling them why, they'll more or less stay the same, I'd say 90% of the time. Even an opponent who knows that they are hitting too many buttons can't necessarily stop it. Because part of the reason why not hitting buttons is scary is because they don't necessarily know what to do in the situations it creates. That situation, for example, was, again, they wanted to naturally know that I couldn't punish them, but hit a button anyway. Part of the problem with this is that it lowers your accuracy quite a lot while telegraphing your movement if you have a heavy motion character. Having low accuracy in this game can be fairly limiting, given that you have so much more freedom of movement in various directions. In other words, your spacing does not only matter in terms of forward and back, but also up and down. in some ways, it's actually somewhat similar to the so-called 3D games because in most 3D games, you don't really spend that much time being able to evade attacks by getting off the ground. So really, you most likely are sidestepping them in one direction or another. The thing that makes 3D games very 3D, and you can't deny that, is the orientation toward the wall and so on. But you can think of it very similarly in here, except that you don't have an option to go downward. You mostly are just going up and higher up.
It's all or nothing. Let's go. 終わりだ。悪夢はいいか。終わりだ。終わりだ。終わりだ。終わりだ。悪夢はいいか。どうした。終わりだ。悪夢はいいか。悪夢はいいか。
You're able to see that for the most part, I could just assume that my opponent was going to attack and counter. The question is really how fast can I do a counter motion actually, more so than anything else. And Frieza even has these options, he just gets out of the way instead, meaning that my situation is a little worse. But for the most part, I think they were the same sort of timing. With their long punish buttons, my characters are also capable of dealing heavily with people who don't have perfect aim. Similarly, my problem there, for example, is that I actually couldn't keep that going. I can't just do it twice and solve the problem that way. Therefore, it's important to make sure for Frieza, for example, that when I do this, my opponent can't just mash buttons when I'm near them as you've just seen there. But Frieza doesn't have a real way to deal with that, so you have to live through it. I need 18 more minis later. Ah, I don't know that. Guess we have to find out some other time. I have no idea how that actually works. Maybe it's a radius around it. Either way, you apparently can't beat certain timings of Vanish by sparking. It's confusing sometimes, the fact that some people just don't change, even when faced with relatively punishing and consistent responses. This is often because they either have no other plan, can't handle their characters in the way that they expect in certain matchups, or just expect that the situation will change. For example, the idea that this will work out because, I mean, you could eventually win by just hitting the button enough. Seems like a sensible response to have to certain things anyway. You have to face an opponent who's much more on point with certain things to make that a bad idea. For example, there. That could have been, again, a parry counter style thing, but I really didn't expect it to hit even more buttons. That's pretty. Come back in. This strategy, for example, has the same problem. You can't use Big Bang Attack on 18 too much because she'll just absorb it, and I just don't have the timing down. If your argument would be then, well, you don't have the timing down, that's perfectly valid. But teaching me how to do something is really not in your best interest most of the time. This becomes even more dangerous when the opponent knows which of their buttons beat which of yours. Because then they don't even have to care about whether or not hitting buttons is what's going on. They'll just do stuff anyway. This, for example, has basically no effect on FIFA. I will just sparkle immediately and that'll do that. In fact, I'm really not even trying to do anything at this point because I'm just waiting for my opponent to get tired of hitting buttons, think it's time to defend, and do that. Under enough stress, people fall to the level of their training. This isn't something you should be ashamed of, but rather just expect that when you are in a stressful situation, your body will automatically do those things without you having any real input. Getting past that can be fairly difficult.
Should be a great fight.
But as you learn more and more, your options increase. And especially at the beginning of the round when you can afford to take a little damage, it's better to play along those lines. Since in this sort of game the first hit tends to be the most effective one. You generally want to go for this. Even that, for example, could have been countered. But again, eventually I assume, probably incorrectly, my opponent will eventually stop hitting buttons. This can be a good lesson for you to learn fairly early on, that some people just really won't ever stop. But, of course, this doesn't really help you unless you know what buttons to hit when they eventually slow down a little bit, or don't. Sometimes the situation you're in just isn't enough to do it. I should have expected that too, for example. And that. My opponent knows how to stand still in neutral, but as soon as the scramble actually happens, they immediately panic. Oh, deflectable. I would not have thought that. And that was basically a matter of, can I hit that move, because I know they're going to do it. You know they do. But this is also a good reason to just keep on mashing buttons. Your opponent is forced on the defensive and their physical skill is tested, whereas yours is not. It is why people who tend to mash buttons get hit with a barrier, namely that of opponents who have practiced enough to punish them heavily for things, and who won't flinch or falter or not be able to execute things when under that strain. But now let's shift to the opposite. Someone who is more likely to stand still in neutral, try to reposition themselves and thinking about where they want to be and why. And while they probably will do certain things in scrambles, that will approximate to attacking, they're usually thinking more about the scramble itself and how it came about. So you have to take a little bit more time to think yourself about what is likely to happen. The interaction is a little faster. You can see, for example, that even though I know my opponent is going to hit certain buttons, their spacing and idea of when to hit those buttons is different. Meaning that my counterattacks should not work on being as fast as possible, but being as accurate as possible. In other words, against this opponent I need to aim more than I need to move. When my aim is off, their advantage increases quite heavily. They in turn also use their aim to lock me down a little bit better. This also leads to more effective baiting in a lot of situations. You can manipulate this situation, for example, by making it so your opponent has very little time or specific target locations for their supers. An opponent who focuses very much on their accuracy, aim, and interrupts will generally naturally use their super in situations where they've confirmed it or where they know exactly what they're doing. If you can keep out of their reach, therefore, the meter just ends up building up. And since most of the things you can do with it in this game are relatively targeted, they may not want to just go ham with level 3s or level 1s or trying to use it for vanishes because their style of play and their characters don't really lend themselves to it. My characters, for example, can just waste meter on interactions like the end of the last match because they cover for each other well. And they have good strong auto combos from their long medium attacks, meaning that it's easy to get to go into super without much thought about aim, allowing me to focus on my evasion and countering. This matchup is much harder because breaking on the rabbit's defense with that style of play is much harder, and his characters are better at defending or reacting in spacing that would otherwise be dangerous, meaning that you spend a lot more time wanting to hit buttons but being slightly out of range, and then as soon as you do, it becomes your opponent's turn. Since their damage comes from heavy conversion and not from evasion and similar tricks, this sort of thing tends to be the way it turns out. Creating a scramble that you know you have control of is just as useful in terms of dealing with this style of play. With the additional patience and the fact that even with all of that damage, Krillin could just heal most of it, means that you don't have to worry as much about this sort of thing. If you take most, if not all of your damage by an interaction that only comes up if you attack in certain timings, you know that you're not going to die suddenly or randomly based on just your opponent doing certain motions. When your health gets lower, you might care. But for Krillin in particular, literally just soaking up damage in scrambles is one of the things the character is honestly quite good at. He doesn't have to care about a lot of this. If it's not going to kill him, and he knows he can stall, he'll just heal himself. While his teammates are alive, that's even harder, because if he's not comfortable with the idea of going for the senzu beam, then he can simply call one of them instead. Similarly, if you know you can buy a lot of time in these situations by simply blocking a lot and then waiting on the interaction, you can buy enough time for Krillin to become an assist that can do this for you. This level of defensive play, where you control the pace of the damage you take so that your opponent can't convert into big damage, utilizes Krillin's power at probably its maximum. It doesn't have to be true stalling, in that you can keep on going in, but that you simply are ready to heal yourself after every attempt that actually fails. on that note, let's consider deflection as an option. Deflecting is generally slightly less effective than blocking in this game because of both the Dragon Rush and the fact that while Deflect has a good long window, there are moves in this game that have long enough startup but are still good idea or safe at certain ranges, that if you try to deflect an advancing move, you might get hit by a zoning one, which might be a big deal to you. There's one example. Generally, I don't like deflecting against Kid Buu for precisely that reason. Not only will he tend to get back in, the situation often doesn't go as well as you'd expect it to. And of course, I've noted, whenever you mistime something, you have to reset yourself. In this case, therefore, my opponent is using Vegeta, who has a much better option of getting out of the way of things without being caught by certain moves. While it is not strictly speaking evasion, it is a matter of masked advance, which against people who are trying to or expecting to need to counter you can cause them to whiff their counterattack.
Time to begin the match. It's all or nothing. Go!
As you learn to recognize when a scramble has happened, and therefore what your opponent's mindset in that scramble is, then you get to pay attention to spacing and decisions about whether or not what you're choosing to do afterward will always work. Trunks vs. Kid Buu is a good example of this, primarily because they both can force the other into a lot of blocking situations, and the match can actually get fairly slow if neither one is willing to take the chance to press their advantage after a scramble startup. The difference being that in these situations, the team with the bigger damage output of the various scrambling factions tends to end up winning out. Meaning that tactically, whether or not you approach a particular scramble the same way has more to do with the other characters on the opposing team, or the remaining characters on the opposing team, than the direct matchup itself. In short, OmniRabbit's team is absolutely more capable of dealing big damage out of scrambles than Science. Meaning that, most of the time, it's in OmniRabbit's best interest to keep pushing buttons in scrambles, even if he occasionally gets beat out by some of the Kid Buu's options. Until the opponent gets returned. And depending on how much health he has, the meter may not matter because there's sparking, there's standard escapes, and of course there's Krillin's ability to heal himself. In short, this team has higher defense. They can keep their health up for longer. And if they manage to do it decently, they can just soak up the opponent's meter and force said opponent to give them meter in the process. Here's another example. Sparking may be gone, but there's still the opportunity to make your way out of this given enough time. Trunks really more or less just has to stall here. Now he has to switch, and Trunks can go back to healing up. While Gohan stands his ground, because he usually can manage to do this. Especially against an opponent that one knows is going to be button beat. You have a lot of options for staying alive for long periods. Trunks is already almost healed all the way back up, meaning that even Gohan's damage is probably not that big a deal. The same thing will probably just happen from the other side. Therefore, even without Krillin and without sparking, depending on your concept of the rhythm of the game, for example, does this kill? If this doesn't kill, then it's once again a lot of meter used to get a lot of blue damage. One correct decision at that point will reset it to having to fight Gohan again. But in this case it has paid off, somewhat. And at least it managed to cause the sparking to use up. Spanish cancel. But you can easily see how long that takes. We discussed this match a bit last week. Or rather, the general match for here. This team is good because their scrambles are very versatile in terms of what they force you to do. You have to approach each of the three differently. Cell is not great in scrambles, but has a lot of good chase downs. Broly is not great in scrambles, but will hurt you if you don't neutral jump, or sometimes if you do neutral jump and you just really ride it really hard. You can back jump too, but it doesn't work as well. And 16 is the opposite in that he can hurt you a little for back dashing out and so on, but can hurt you a lot for jumping. So your better bet in his case is usually to do a special or a long attack, such as Stand Heavy, because his movements tend to be interrupted by this. Remembering how to handle each of them, and keeping it in mind while doing everything else in the match, can be a little stressful sometimes. Since they all are very slightly different in what their scramble looks like, it gets even harder than that. Since you must recognize the scramble and have the appropriate response based on character. This is actually slightly easier depending on the way your mind works. For some of us, the concept of scramble is where we get our responses. For others, it is this specific scramble, like spacing-wise, will get associated with the specific response. For people like that, it's obviously easier to deal with this sort of thing. Furthermore, understanding that each of your own characters has a different response or way to deal with the scramble based on their range or general ability factors in on top of that. Trunks, for example, doesn't deal well with Cell in scrambles because he'll tend to get whiff punished. However, he deals particularly well with Broly in scrambles, whereas Gohan is better at dealing with scrambles when it comes to 16. On the other side, therefore, generally one tries to keep it in that same thing. 16 being brought in to deal with Trunks in scrambles again. But note, one of the other things that can be very important to you is the fact that the scramble is not necessarily indicative of the entire matchup. If your entire matchup against a particular character is based entirely around avoiding said scrambles, and you're good enough at it, the fact that your character may be disadvantaged in those scrambles may not be enough of a problem for you. Simply keep them in anyway because they're how you're going to win the match, one way or the other. Similarly, well, for example here, Gohan is much better at dealing with Broly as a whole, since Broly doesn't deal so well with Gohan's elbow or his back moving air Ki blast, and similar. He has to move a lot more wildly, which eventually gives Gohan an opening for whatever he wants, really. It's still important to know, though, because they're two halves of the same game. It might feel as if, well, there's lots more parts of it, but not technically. Technically speaking, you are either playing neutral, which is not a scramble, or you've gotten a knockdown, and you know exactly where your situation is. You're either going for pressure or going back to a form of neutral that you prefer. A knockdown is definitely not a scramble. A dropped combo is one, but the better you get at the game, the less you'll drop your combos. So in terms of thinking about it, your combos are more or less the one-player game. You just have to be good enough to execute them. Neutral is one part of the game, and scrambles are the other part.
Time to begin the match!
Now this week I'm not going to go into too much between these two teams. There's too much minor complexity in it to be going into it as a general thing.
Get ready! Fight! これならどうだくそ行くぞくそそこだ引かんぞ終わりだ全然消えろくらえ了解だもう終わりかそろそろ無駄だその調子そこですか生意気だよお前俺がここ何なんだ後悔しますよもうここまでだどこへ行くんだくそ行くぞ終わりだ化け物め問題ないなんだと行くぞパワーを見せてやる甘いなかったるいね行くぞ立て直す銃座君いい加減にしろ立て直す俺が殺してやろうその程度ですか無駄なこと
This is usually about not letting your defense get broken and not being too thrown off by when you do get hit. Against some opponents, it's better to simply not actually think about anything that happened in the match at all. Some people are extremely creative, some are very random, and some are trying to sync to your style of play. By attempting to stand up to someone who is doing any of those three things, by paying attention to the last thing they did and trying to make decisions based on patterns, you will fail because the pattern in the situation is you, not them. This is in fact one of the most important things to understand about playing people who seem random in the first place. Since you can't tell whether or not they are random, mashy, oppressive, or super geniuses, or just like they're in your head so they always know what's coming, making decisions based on past information is just wasting processing time. While you don't necessarily have to become random yourself, you shouldn't necessarily be planning based on that. You should be trying to play your own game or play just the matchup. Because, interestingly, characters that do well in the hands of such people often are relatively weaker in most matchups involving a lot of neutral, because they flow around things and try to solve problems that way, rather than being able to control a lot of space. You can see, for example, that Brawly and both control space in a relatively linear way, and honestly Cell does too. He just has more options for it. Therefore, a lot of your skill comes from reaction and execution, along with a basic understanding of how to keep up certain forms of defense. You must keep up defense in very short bursts to prevent your opponent from being able to keep out your various concepts of defense. Continually moving is often also helpful, but even then you should still expect to take some hits. Another good reason why you need to try your best to let go of this concept that you've taken a lot of hits is because a lot of the time, this style of play doesn't lead to you taking a lot of damage at once. Since the opponent is no more prepared for what they are about to do than you are, It's difficult for them to have a strong offense in mind. They're not trying to open you up so that they can get big damage. They are trying to stop whatever you're doing and hit you whenever that situation comes up. But those hits often don't amount to much. Understanding that aspect of that very sympathetic play style can help it be less frustrating. And from the other side, if you do play like that as a general thing, you should get used to the idea that your opponent isn't necessarily going to start respecting your damage. Meaning that you have to spend more time learning how to convert on the fly and do big damage out of strange, random clips using either your meter or other general special abilities of your character. For example, using Raw Vanish in these situations does add on to that style of play as a whole, but it also eats up a lot of meter that might be needed in other situations. Putting you at what ends up feeling like a constant meter disadvantage. Of course, when the opponent gets a bit more worn down and starts to have to worry about being finished off, they obviously need to care a lot more about your style of play, and therefore you can drift back toward that, just playing naturally and expecting your constant movement and flow to bring you some victory in that regard. Unexpected options completely. For example, charging key when you are expecting the opponent to move closer can create this sort of problem though. If the player knows enough about your character, they can say, well, I'm going to get hit randomly anyway. I'm used to this person hitting me randomly and not doing that much damage. How can I gain the most out of that scenario? How can I best leverage the fact that they don't hit me that hard? Not many characters have a lot of good options when it comes to this. As long-range attacks in this game don't often lead to big damage. However, if you do have a team that is good at that, be sure to pay more attention to whether or not your opponent is actually hurting you a lot. This is a large part of the zoning strategy of this game. If you spend too much time worrying about taking hits at all, and therefore trying to avoid that, you might end up changing your play style in a way that your opponent wants to happen. This team is a good example of it, since as we mentioned before, they can just heal out of certain things. Even that type of damage doesn't really mean that much. And as mentioned, understanding that you can use certain timings and spacings to switch characters, get your hurt character out of these situations, can help a lot. Knowing when to go for sparkling in the same situation also helps a lot. Overall, wearing the opponent down is just a little easy. But as you've seen before, these characters, as mentioned, are not the best at converting into big damage. Particularly not early in the game, where they have to worry about whether or not that damage is just going to be back. So even with full meter, well, 4 bars of it, 5 bars a moment ago. Without the absolute plan as to how to make that into damage, 16 ends up being much less effective. And since the player is usually waiting for an option, they don't have time necessarily to set up their own healing or escape. Since that's not the thing on their mind, leading to a lot more situations like this where they have to activate sparking or they need to switch, and the timing they'll end up doing it in will probably be disadvantageous to them rather than advantageous. And Gohan is unlikely to worry about the damage being done here, because he's either going to get finished heal it, or just leave and come back. And the 7 bars of music from Broly are mostly going to matter if the mix-up can be created. It's actually really important in the beginner levels of the game to pay attention to how much damage your opponent is actually dealing, and not how much time they're hitting. Most online play, however, will more or less consist of people who have practiced certain very heavy combos. There will still always be people with this style though. But here again, you see a lot of blue health damage. Broly tends to do a lot of blue health damage for some reason. A lot of meters still existing, but a lot less to worry about is a wholesome killing stuff. Trying to recover out or defend against this type of thing can be quite the opposite of what you actually want to do. Mobility, random counters, and trying certain specials may be better, especially if they move you in some way. Because, as mentioned, similar to the adult Gohan problem, you can offset your opponent's ability to finish out with enough damage.
Time to begin the match.
So, let's look at this match from that perspective. What is the best way for 18, for example, to avoid situations and limit the damage done to her, rather than dealing with it the other way? Frieza, as an example, can probably soak up some stuff from this spacing and range. This, for example, was decent damage, but not that bad. Also, some damage, but not like terrible. That was the moment I did the wrong thing. I should have moved out of the way of that. Similarly, that is the best way that 18 can deal with this. If she's in the air when she uses her barrier and the opponent is not expecting it, she does not actually take all that much damage. And again, those long normals mean that the opponent can't be all that sure what good situation or bad situation they're in, just based on the fact that she moved that off. This also gives you more time to watch your opponent and understand their idea of how the match is played. You just learn that to come up with a strategy as to how to approach her. Even if you have to take some hits in order to make yourself think about it properly. In fact, one of the easier ways to do this for yourself is when you are in a combo in a game like this, since they take a decent amount of time, let your eyes drift over to the life bar. See how much damage you take from it. See how much you need to fear that combo, that situation. If you are fairly confident that it will take a while for the combo to execute, even though it doesn't do a ton of damage, things with long specials or similar, such as those possessed by the Wolf's team, you can take some time to look at your own meter, your opponent's meter, and come up with strategies from there as well.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! It's all or nothing! Fight! どうした？さっだ！砕け散る！気をつけて！カメハメハ！この程度か。しまった。なんなんだ。ビッグバン楽しめそう。ビッグバン楽しめそう。俺も少しは役に立つかもしれない。無駄だ。大丈夫ですか。立て直す。こっちだ。行くぞ。まずい。行くぞ。いい加減にしてください。許さんぞ。立て直す。無理をしてんだ。どこへ行くんだ。押し込め。これこいつはハンドだ。来い。よし、そこだ。目だ。もう終わりだ。殺す。そこだ。こんなものだ。目玉だ。こんなものだ。そんなバカな。魔をするな。もう終わりか。この程度か。元気にか。さてと。カメハメハ。この程度。しまった。全体。そこまで。行くぞ。行くぞ。もう距離がきつい。こっちだ。お前が騒がしくしたせいで小鳥たちが逃げてしまった。
This one about Kame is actually rather in line with the lore related to Dragon Ball fighters and Dragon Ball itself. If you've never watched the show, you can imagine what a shonen about superpowered beings moving superhumanly fast while having martial arts against each other would look like. a lot of the time, stray hits in that show don't really matter that much. They're a good way to test who is faster, who has the better understanding of a particular situation. Just get a feel for the opponent. But most of the time, those are not the ways that the matches are going to be decided. One person can get worn down eventually, and we do have some cool battles in both the manga and the anime that rely entirely on that. But for the most part, it's the big mistakes that people make, the timings where someone has actually gotten seriously hurt for something they did incorrectly. Those are the moments you're looking for. So the sort of thing you see here, where one player is out of position, and that being out of position is the main thing that causes the problem, is actually fairly common for Dragon Ball as a concept. It is at that point that the game becomes fun, because you can start to see where your opponent's damage is coming from, their most likely next action, and so on. Let go of the feeling that getting hit matters, and you'll reduce the amount of thinking you need to do in a match. Overall, that should be your goal. To think less, to watch a lot, to be aware of many things. But you don't have to think about what those things mean right away all the time. Sometimes you can just observe yourself. In fact, part of the reason why having a spotter or someone who can give you advice is so effective is not necessarily because the person has to be better than you, but simply that they aren't playing and therefore don't have the thoughts related to playing while they're doing it. But you could do that for yourself. As long as you have enough of decent autopilot, understanding of and love for your characters, you could just watch yourself play the game and make notes. Oh look, something interesting happened. Oh look, it would be a good idea to do this right here maybe, and then just do it. And sometimes you'll be wrong, but it's still generally more fun.
Are you ready? Go! 殺してくれ。問題ない。行くぞ。行くぞ。立て直す。立て直す。この攻撃から甘いな。この攻撃からクリリンさん。この攻撃から黙れ黙れバーリング。すぐにスピードが自信があるんだ。地球ごと消えてなくなる。まだいける。この程度だ。終わらせてやる。バーリングだ。フランクス大丈夫か。砕けしろ。全力でいくぞ。ここは握ってやる。甘いな。どうした。問題ない。任す。甘いな。どうした。じゃあ少しだけ。立て直す。お遊びは終わりだ。 俺も少しは役に立つかもしれない。甘いな。立て直す。行くぞ。見切った。勝つぞ。落ちろ。甘いな。行くぞ。さあ、楽しませてもらおうか。どうだ。貴様。
二度と吸収させてたまるか。こう見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Are you ready? Fight!
どうした。本気でいくぞ。
Unnecessary scrambles can also help make this game easier to watch. So if you have gotten to the point where our 3D mashup mnemonic has helped you understand most of what's going on, and are trying to look into why certain decisions are made, this may be the next step in that process. Sometimes, for example, people will seem to do a super thrust for the sake of making the opponent more sparkling, or similar. If they have enough meter to spare and are just trying to force a switch out for sparkling meter, there's something to be said for that. But again, it will come down to matchup, scrambles, and so on. Last week we were talking about offense versus defense scrambles and how that affected things. Switching your opponent's character to one who you beat in defensive scrambles will allow you to buy time, since even if their health is decent, trying to get in on you while you're moving around the place can be bad for their health. And if you happen to move out of the way and they have to deal with the scramble, and you often win that scramble, you've certainly bought yourself enough time. So sometimes, you basically want your opponent's character to switch so that the one you are trying to in the background can heal up more, without you having to do any work or think about it in the meantime. It also helps that, people could drag and rush you and roll out the character you're currently facing. But if you use it right, you can get around that as well by forcing them to play enough neutral or play from far enough away that even if they eventually succeeded at that, because it doesn't actually hurt that much when they do it, even if they've eventually succeeded at that, by the time they've finally gotten around to it, the character that they want to swap in has recovered at least enough that you're comfortable, and since your opponent switching out your character doesn't necessarily affect your assists and so on, they could be back and ready to fight at their full power. All these little tactical parts influence how decisions are made.
A fierce showdown is about to begin.
So our reasoning last time was, if 18 can get into the air, she can avoid taking a lot of damage, she can soak up a lot of meter usage, and so on, since it's hard to pin her down in order to use supers. What if we try to do this from a more offensive perspective, though?
Get ready. Let's go.
仕方がありませんね。すぐに終わらせてやる。交代だ。俺も少しは役に立つかもしれない。
まだまださらや17号まだまださら
Getting used to punishing her timing when she falls is one thing, but she can even further delay that, so it's not as if it helps a whole lot. You see already that she managed to get away from taking much damage in any direction there. She's a decently good zoning character, as I mentioned before. I play her like that reasonably often. Well, I like Kate fell on the Piccolo instead, since Cell tends to be a little bit more creative in the spaces he takes up. But even this isn't really that stressful to me. In this case, for example, I've managed to make my opponent use a lot of movement, which is kind of the plan. This leaves Brawly relatively starved for it, and still having to deal with Frieza and Piccolo. However, unfortunately I did miss my attack, so this is a little difficult now. The final result, however, is still about the same. Well, now I have meter advantage. Oh. In the end, though, being able to appreciate the fact that your opponent has ways to counter your plans is part of fighting. And technically, realizing after the fact that you had other options doesn't necessarily mean that you would have won had you used them, because again, you might have been telegraphing your own pattern. It's easy to get the feeling that you are being either random or creative, but to your opponent, it might be that they can see some pattern that even you cannot see in yourself. After all, they're the ones watching for it. Fortunately, my characters tend to have a lot of varied options. For example, right now I can start with stand heavy or I can start with counter. And there's no way for my opponent to know which of those is going to happen.
その程度ですか。生意気だよお前。そろそろもうここまでだ。ちょっと本気を出しますよ。出番ですよ。
まだ逃げたく逃げてもいいよ。
俺のエネルギーは永久に減らない。俺のエネルギーは永久に減らない。
貴様の相手はこの僕だ。まだせい頼んだよ。
覚悟はいいか。終わりだ。こういうとも僕は優しい。生意気だよ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。生意気だよお前。その調子。なるほど。甘いですよ。今です。
This is another good example. I've noted that my opponent has started to, for example, hit their invincible moves to finish out their combo, but I don't actually care about this. This move is not converting to that much innately. It doesn't do a ton of damage in a way that I care about. The opponent is therefore needing to use specific methods to keep themselves out of getting punished and out of trouble means I'm more than likely going to have a lot of opportunities to regain health.
分かった分かった。
じゃあね、バイ。
And from there, the job is just to force the sparking. So the rest of the match becomes mostly thinking about how to solve their problems, rather than actually solving them. That, for example, was just not realizing how exactly I'm supposed to get 18 to come in from there, because she would have finished it off. You can play quite a long game, expecting to be able to read your opponent's movements correctly. And the final deception, today's match.
Android 18 win.
へえ、あんたなかなかやるじゃないか。 じゃあ次は本気を出しても構わないね。
This should be a great fight!
However, the reappearance of Team Right on cue means that now we're going to be looking at the backwards evasion and mobility aspect of scrambles.
It's all or nothing! Fight it out!
Not for Cell though, because as noted, Cell isn't exactly great at this. More so, he gets molded to the style of the player. Part of Nappa's playstyle actually involves being able to protect his own side moves. Once he does find the opportunity to put them down, he can sometimes use his counter expecting an attack that is intended to stop their motion. This is doubly effective because if the opponent chooses not to attack, they can't necessarily hit Nappa because the Cyberman will stop them. So he can literally cover his own situation from both sides. This usually requires really good spacing or understanding of your opponent's options, but mostly anything short of them punishing with super will normally be good. So you can actually use this to soak up a lot of their meters or force situations that they are not comfortable with. This works particularly well if he's just outside of the Dragon Rush range against characters who otherwise have long buttons. Once you've gotten it into the idea of the opponent that they must do this or have to do this a different way, Nappa can go for instance like Super Dash and other things that allow him to approach. But of course, this sort of thing needs to be trained. And as noted, this is a beginner lobby and you don't necessarily spend a lot of time training this. It's more so mentioned as a passing thing that could be done. Despite Nappa's strength in this iteration of the game, he is a relatively difficult character to master because of the mind games and spacing involved. But do remember the payoff we mentioned before. Last we were talking about the fact that this style of play generally involves the opponent using a lot more meter than just Vine does. Cashing in that meter can be difficult though, since Cell versus very strong defense doesn't always come out in that way. he tends to need to have a lot of health in order to make that really work. However, the main reason that it becomes difficult is because Cell doesn't actually cash in meter by using supers. He does so by adding Vanish to his arsenal of difficult to avoid things, meaning that he's even harder away from. Vanish also allows him to convert off a lot of things he normally can't, but also noted as something that requires some practice.
これで全てが終わりましたよ。ありがとう、悟空さんたち。頼ってばかりはいられない。これからも俺のこの手で勝つんだ。
That sort of practice is what we will probably be using our Dragon Ball FighterZ bot to do in the upcoming weeks.
Get ready for battle!
This game is easy to pick up, but has a lot of subtleties in it. The problem being that you can't practice something until you have understood enough of what was going on to know what's in your lap. So far in this situation, Just Line faces quite a few things that need to be specifically grinded out, to be done with their characters. But similar to our Sandbag Casual segment, reaching the point where you can look at the situation and make a decision about something you're missing and realize that comes up a lot, I should probably practice it, can be really helpful. Fortunately, Nappa is also, as mentioned, sort of tanky, so he's good at avoiding taking a lot of damage at a time, especially against his opponent, meaning that him getting to heal up is a good prospect. He's also another strong with punish character as Just Line tends to play, meaning that you have to be fairly on point with the distance you travel to certain of his attacks. Note that Vegeta and Cell can both also do this, but they have to do it with specials. This is not outside the realm of normal possibility, especially not for her, but it's a bit more to think about. Especially since some of their better with punishes require you to actually have meter to use the heavy version. But it is noted as being basically the same as Power Fighter 5 Kata 33. Well, Kata 30. No, in this game is probably closest to Kata 33 because your opponent is not going to be in a space where you can easily track them.
受け止める勇気があるか。
Oh, we're doing sparking counter to sparking. That'll be interesting. Another interaction on sparking that we do not quite know.
Time to begin the match!
Now, as noted, none of my characters are particularly good at the chase down. Their chase attacks all tend to head toward the ground. Piccolo will often be out of range and similar. But if we use the principle that I get to do things that might help me because the opponent has moved away, maybe I'll come up with something. Despite the ability to Super Dash, that one homing projectile is quite useful to Piccolo because the Super Dash situation that normally leads to the player not being trackable by it or being generally dangerous to him isn't always one that you can easily fix from the other player's side. And he does have some options for that position. They just involve really expecting your opponent to try to occupy it. Well, Vegeta, of course, he can deal with that much better, so it's not really good to have Piccolo deal with that. Eighteen, however, does have some options as well. She's much better at the overall chase than other characters. But more so because she's good at buying time. Frieza, as noted, attacks downward most of the time and therefore is really bad at it other than by using his EX. But this style of play often leads to terrible neutral disadvantages. So it would be much better to think of something else to do from that situation. But one thing we have discussed before, and nearly never use, is simply being stubborn. As I've noted before, the team is not so good at actually managing to attack. So if they intend to get away and stay away, and count on the fact that I will come to them, I can just not. This isn't always the best way to do it, nor does it always work all at once. But with really long normals, I can also take the Kata 33 approach, as shown there. Both 18 and Frieza actually have such long stand mediums that you can backdash out and attack anyone who attacks the space you were just in. Frieza being the most evasive possible for this. In fact, you'll have more problems if you try to stay closer in order to achieve this than not. Piccolo can similarly do this, but he doesn't do it with the same type of attack, and he can't follow up on it as easily. On the other hand, he's Piccolo. Why do you care? This is not effective against opponents who have really strong beams and are likely to try to clip you that way instead, but neither Vegeta nor Nappa does, meaning that the structure of that match can be deciphered based on it.
This should be a great fight. Ready? Let's go!
楽しくやはり父さんは強いな。頼ってばかりはいられない。これからも俺のこの手で勝つんだ。
The battle's about to start. Good luck! It's all or nothing. Fight!
殺してやる。つまんでやる。邪魔をするな。さん付けや。ち。マジだ。防災だ。さあ、受けてみろ。カメハメ。くれ。だ。なんで。無駄だ。この程度。そろそろだらん。さて、この程度なんだ。何？どうだ。 遅いし荒木だ行くぞにならん
俺も少しは役に立つかもしれない甘いねせいせい
荒木だ触りだ覚悟しろ
立て直す甘いな少しだけ
そのはずはない
甘いな
だぞどうだ
少しだけせい甘いな
この俺らお荷物だ
甘いなせい問題ないこいつだとそろそろくらえバックだはあそっしまこの私にバリーやちょっと言ってやるこいつはどうか
おけばやろう
無駄なことおっと遅いだ見えたぞ無駄だこいつは俺卒業
どうだ
遅いだそろそろ
行くぞ覚悟しろ
どこへ行くんだ調子に乗りやがっておっと無駄だおっともう殺す無駄だ何なんだもし減らず口を叩けな無駄だ動け気に入らねえなこもし減らず口を叩けなくしてやるぜすぐに終わらせてやるはっくらえさてと目のスピードに自信があるんださっだ砕け散れだでは諸君ごきげんよう不意打ちでも狙っていたのか残念だったな
It can be tempting to feel, once you've understood something, that you must rush to put it all together. But this will take time no matter how you deal with it.
Brace yourself for the coming battle.
What you can do is use this information to decide how much you feel like you enjoy a game, and therefore how much time you really want to devote to it. If everything we've taught and all the understanding of how to watch it and play it has led to anything, hopefully it has led to an understanding of how fun you find the game to be in itself. Because even if you can't do everything, you should be able to visualize what the game might be like for you if you could.
また一匹虫けらが死にに来たか。
Are you ready? Fight it out. そこだ。
大谷だ。
そこだ。
甘いな。
そこだ。くらえ。
甘いな。
くらえ。カウンター。
少しだ。
そこだ。
もうちょいなら。
そこだ。
行くぞ。
せや。
立て直しだ。甘い。行くぞ。その程度ですか。問題ない。なるほど。
楽しめそうだ。
くじ。
覚悟はいいか。そう。
黙っときな。手を抜いているのか。手を抜いているのか。そら。そう食らっときな。
地球ごと消えてなくなる。無駄だ。
お前たちが武士道やな。やれんか。
そろそろ何か。
こいつはどうだい。
今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。
For example, at this point I can think of a way to have fun in this match, even given the way my opponent is currently moving. Juggling. Given that they have to recover in a particular range, it means that this works for quite a while, honestly.
遊びは終わりだ。どこへ行くんだ。無駄なこと。
やな。
邪魔だ。
甘い。覚悟はいいか。これならどうだ。覚悟はいいか。
どこへ行くんだ。もう終わりか。殺してやる。お前の思い通りにはさせん。甘いな。今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。行くぞ。しまった。あだだ。その調子。
あんたが相手かい。はあ。行くよ。そら。黙っとき。
行くぞ。
はあ。
殲滅する。
Once you change your opponent's mindset, you can do other things.
覚悟はいいか。行くぞ。
甘いな。行くぞ。あだだ。もちろん。行くぞ。
これが孫悟空を殺すために作られた俺の力だ。
But onward.
残念だったな。戦闘力は俺の方が上だ。
A fierce showdown is about to begin.
Being able to see all the little pieces that are missing in your game shouldn't generally be frustrating to you. If you can help it, if you're really enjoying the game as a whole, it shouldn't necessarily require that you actually get good at it in order to enjoy it. The requirement is that you understand it. As mentioned before, we're not exactly a bunch of genius attackers in terms of breaking my guard. However, the aspect of fighting games that I find fun is breaking other people's guards. So it actually means I'm very likely to lose because of the likelihood that they'll be waiting for my attacks to come. And when those attacks come, but I can still do this sort of thing when I feel I've had enough about the trying to break their defense and failing thing. And if all I really want is to clear out a character or something, the style normally leads to that being possible either way. The law normally helps. This in turn will tend to unnerve my opponents and make them more likely to attack in scrambles, but not necessarily more likely to attack in normal situations. Because the scramble becomes the point of the match where they can get any damage. Once that breakdown happens, it becomes relatively relaxing, quote unquote.
行くよ17号。分かった分かった。じゃあね、バイ。黙っときな。クリリンの技だよ。
その鬱陶しい口を黙らせてやる。
17に考えてもらうよ。
It is that knowledge of how to get to the point of the match or the game where it is no longer
もしも
stressful
っと
and
腕を上
is
げることがで
relaxing
きたら
that
ま
helps
た
you
相手にな
play
ってやる
better.
と言っておいてくれ。
If you're not the type that likes to relax during your fighting games, you generally don't have any problems in the first place, so it doesn't come up.
あんたなかなかやるじゃないか。じゃあ次は本気を出しても構わない。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! Are you ready? Fight! どうした？どうした？ベジータ様を失望させるなよ。逃がさないぞ。ラキだ。カメハメハ。カウンター。逃がさないぞ。カメハメハ。はい。決めた。この俺がおどうだ。いっぱい飛ばすぞ。カメハメハ。よっと。よっと。くらえ。さあ。曲がれ。さあ。さあ。成果を見せてやる。バ
もういい、変われ。
どうだどうだ行かないぞ。行くぞ。僕も加勢します。ここだ。どうだ。参った。行きますよベジータさん。マセコ
雑魚が人暴れしてやるか。無駄てめえ
行くぞ。
無駄だ。あがけあがけ。
せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。
どうだ。足にならん。一応受け止める勇気があるか。行くぞ。まだまだ。
全体のこの
魚を通す。この俺だ。
足にならん。
せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。しい減らず口を叩けなくしてやるぜ。おいおい、まだくたばるなよ。もう少し遊ばせろ。スーパーサイヤ人ベジータの野郎、見せつけやがって。
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Are you ready? Let's go!
スピードには自信があるんだ。この私にバリーこの程度か。地球ごと消えてなくなる。
どうした。
任せ。
問題ない。無理はするな。こいつはどうか。この程度か。ぬっはー遊びは終わりだ。お前の思い通りにはさせん。殲滅する。行くぞ。見切った。立て直す。先だな。先だな。先だな。もちろん。行くぞ。しまった。今のうちに下がって。あれを使うしかあるまい。立て直す。さて、この私にバリアを払わせるとそこまで。行くぞ。あだで。どうした。見切った。行くぞ。行くぞ。あだで。行くぞ。甘いな。こっちだ。行くぞ。やるな。
俺も結構やるじゃん。これでも少しは腕を上げたんだからさ。
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess!
Looking at this from the perspective of defense, as with all fighting games, will often make you feel stressed out. Defense is almost always harder because you have to understand the timings that your opponent has control of and not yourself. It's as simple as that. It's why we prefer to be on offense most of the time. It does not matter how many times you think of deflecting if you don't know the timing to deflect whatever is in question.
その鬱陶しい口を黙らせてやろう。楽しめそう。どこへ行くんだ。こっちだよ。その程度ですか。もうここまでだ。
どうした
なるほど。
さてと
まだまだ17時間の侍よ。
大軍はいいか。
立て直す。甘いな。立て直す。
行くぞ。
軽いね。黙っときな。まだまだ。やっ
任せ。もちろん。行くぞ。
究極のセンスはもうここにいるだろう。
終わりだ。
終わりだ。問題ない。
遊びは終わりだ。これならどうだ。
そろそろ死にたいだろ。その程度ですか。
For example, at this rate, I can probably just win by 10 up. Sometimes defense is sufficient if your intention is not to win by beating up your opponent.
いいか。なんだ。クズ逃げられるか。これならどうだ。これならどうだ。これならどうだ。
Since I'm a sparkler, I don't really mind the damage taken there. But I should have expected my opponent to keep on attacking that particular day, for example. Okay.
分かった。
Is it gonna kill? Apparently yes.
俺が殺してやろう。
まだまだ手を抜いているのか。
Even though standing up to relentless attacks like that is, as mentioned, defense. It's about timing. It's about things you have to learn to do. Still, it is something you have to learn. So don't be afraid to try it sometimes. You may even need to be willing to try it against an opponent who can keep up with you otherwise. So, we are coming to the end of this stream. we will be working on the bots as mentioned this weekend. Therefore, tomorrow will be our Dead or Alive last round content. The characters free in that game at the moment are Helena and Zack, and it will be so for the rest of the next Friday. They will change. But it would be best if you, wherever they switch to, you poke out a little bit, so we'll probably be doing the Dragon Ball FighterZ bots next Friday. Should be time to mess with that. Next Sunday we'll be having our Mishmash Battle Round for Fighter 5 as usual. And Tuesday will be Guilty Gear, the Tuesday train. And Wednesday will once again be stand by casuals, maybe looking at Colleen's stuff today. And of course that brings us back around to next Thursday for more comments. But with that, this is Viridian for Team 2MK. Good night, everyone.
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんま